I mean, this is what I call the triangle of death, right? Where you have a tool that's being implemented, you have the implementer, which is usually some third-party company,
Right.
and then you have the customer itself. When something goes wrong, who's at fault? And for me,
Welcome to the Financial Innovations Podcast. We're helping CFOs save money and time by investing in cutting-edge technology. Really excited today to have Kirk Kappelhoff with us. Kirk, nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Looking forward to a productive chat.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that's extra exciting about this episode is, you have more of a financial modeling background, and that's probably a topic that we haven't touched on a lot over the last episodes that we've done here. I guess where I wanted to start was just what I've seen, and just from some of our earlier discussions, sounds like you're seeing some similar things in there. Is the role of finance and the CFO have really evolved over the past X number of years, where you've started, some of the conversations that you have with CFOs today, if you rewind the clock 5-10 years ago, they'd look at you like you were crazy, if you had those conversations then. Maybe if you want to start, and give your take, kind of on how the roles changed, and, then we'll kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, sure, definitely. And you're totally right. The financial modeling piece, it is very unique. It's hard to find a lot of the time as well, because financial modeling is this unique combination of the science of accounting and then the art of forecasting, right? And so putting those together, there's a lot of creativity involved. It's not just looking at sort of like what are the historicals and how do I organize the numbers, but then how do I take those historicals and make a meaningful estimate on what the future revenue forecast could be, and how that knocks down all the way down through my balance sheet and cash flow as well. And so it is a unique one. There's a lot we can chat about there. As for the CFO role that you mentioned, you probably already know this, I'm preaching to the choir here, but traditionally that CFO role is what you would probably consider now to be the controller role. The true, like, let's get the numbers right, let's report correctly. The strategic piece that came in as a result of that came in because the CEO, who has a lot of importance when it comes to the direction of the company, needed the numbers to back it up. So this great quote that you never tell a number without telling a story, and you never tell a story without telling a number. And that's true in the financial world, right? So this CFO need for a strategic partner on the finance side, that's what came out of this, this updated 2.0 CFO role. So now the controller is taking on more of the logistical side of the accounting and reporting, whereas the CFO has to take that into account and then build obviously on top with the forecasting piece as well. This is what's led to the ever-growing field of FP&A, and now what we call RevOps, right, where we're looking even more detailed as a sub-branch of FP&A, which is how do we actually optimize revenue, get the biggest return on our cost to acquire customers, make it cheaper to do so, and keep them longer. So that's a high level piece. I don't know if there's anything else you want to dive into there.
Yeah, no, that's very good, and interesting to talk through, just because it sounds like or it's just I focus a lot more on the financial reporting, planning, implementations for companies, but even just in the technology world, right? Having discussions with finance about, like, if you said, like, hey, I ran a SQL query, they'd look at you like, oh my God, like you're a coder, because you know how to write a query to pull data, right? And even a lot on the technical front, it's you start having conversations with CFOs about data warehouses and data lakes and all of that, and these are things that probably 5, 7, 8 years ago, they would say, hey, let me go get IT in this conversation. And, today they're fielding those questions probably just as good as any CIO that you have, right?
Sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm interested, just with all these implementation pieces that you've had in the past, what traditionally are, from the implementation sides, the biggest concerns of the CFOs, or probably more importantly, the things I don't ask about that they need to?
Right. No, I mean, it's a great question, because, there in the past, it's been a lot of, like, I feel like implementations have been like watching a UFC cage match, right? Like when you have, the IT in the room and finance in the room, and finance saw IT as like the big roadblocker because they say, hey, we've got this innovative software we want to implement. And IT's like, okay, great. We got to procure a server. We got to wait 6 months for that. And then we've got to, install everything on it. And there's another, 2 months for that. And, now, kind of with the emergence of the cloud, things have gone a lot faster. And I think the CFOs have been a lot more empowered to go and, look into and, really understand some of the more concepts that would have been seen as very techy in the past, right? So I think that, it's definitely getting better in terms of the questions being asked over there. I think in the past, a lot of questions have been missed because it's kind of like hey, I'm relying on IT to answer these questions. IT has the knowledge of technology, but they don't necessarily have the knowledge of the business in terms of what are we looking to do. Right. It's the same thing, I guess, as if somebody asked you to build a financial model and you were great at Excel and writing formulas, but you had no idea what about finance, right? And you'd say, all right, I can make the formulas, but you got to tell me what formulas to have. And they say, well, I don't know what formulas you need because I've never built a model before. And it's that communication that's always, held up projects in the past, right? Now that you see that, you can have these conversations. They understand what a data warehouse is, what a data lake is. You start saying, ETL, and they're not running for the hills in terms of, bringing data into the system. And, it's led to a lot cleaner implementations that have gone through, right? Obviously, nothing is without, it's issues and hiccups along the way, right? But the more information that you have, the better it's going to be whenever you're bringing in a team to do an implementation.
No doubt about it. Yeah, it's funny. On the one hand, you've got these CFOs learning all these tech side of things, but yet still 71% of CFOs can't stand up a three-statement financial model, right? If you were to ask them to make a fully integrated balancing three-statement model with a P&L balance sheet and cash flow, they wouldn't be able to do it. And so this is part of why I'm so grateful for the training that I got with specifically KPMG and their modeling team. Because what we went in there to do was essentially learn a skill set that can apply to any business, which is if you don't know where you're going to be in 6 to 12 months, how can you logically set up a system or process, whether that's in Excel or in a tool like DriveTrain, to get the answer that you want? Mainly the answer is what's my free cash flow, right? How do I get to that? A lot of the times when we were building models for IPOs, they would bring in the bankers model, which was really interesting. So that, maybe Barclays put together like a model. And the problem was when they brought it to the street, investors said, this is not even believable. It's too simplistic for us to even accept that this is going to be the revenue projections, right? Slapping 10% on last year's revenue is not convincing anybody. The first question they're going to ask is, how did you arrive at the 10%? And you better have a damn good answer if your forecast is that simple. So having sort of the bottoms up build, or occasionally if it's something like biopharmaceutical models where it's a top-down total addressable market build, that's so important today with the goal in mind of, am I raising money? Am I doing a long-range forecast? Is this operational that's going to be used by department? And so I can imagine that right now CFOs today, and this is true for a lot of them that I've spoken with, are feeling quite overwhelmed because balancing those IT concerns where they need to be these absolute geniuses in the tech world now, also having the creativity of financial modeling, also keeping up to date with all of the new accounting rules that are coming out and being upheld. It's just getting too much for them. And so this ever-growing world of finance and accounting is just becoming more and more applicable, even though it's a cost-burning, non-revenue generating department within the organization. It's nevertheless more important than it's ever been.
Right. Yeah. And even just, it's funny, couldn't help but laugh when you were talking about, taking forecasts and just incrementing it by, a little bit, because those were some of the early planning implementations and stuff that I would do, where they would say, all right, give me a line. The vendor tells me I shouldn't be in Excel, so I'm going to buy this system. So make me a form where I have revenue, and then I have an increment percentage, and then have it, A times B over there to go and give me my number over there. And, it kind of started with a like, okay, my costs were, $1 million last year. Let's increment that by 3% this year. And then my, what if analysis was, what if it's 5% instead of 3%? Right. And now it's like, you look at some of these systems and, I can't help but be amazed by some of these models I see where, people are pulling in, all sorts of data that you would never in a million years even like think about, and they're looking to see what correlations, what patterns am I finding? Like, I'm going to go and pull in weather data to go and tell you what your supply chain should be, right? And it's, now that we have access to, more sophisticated tools, more sophisticated ways of getting data, the process has evolved from just that simple, like, okay, we did $1 million last year. Let's, try to do 1.1 this year, to now, like, hey, if a tsunami hits in Japan on this day over here, what's going to happen to our revenue on this day over here in the United States? It's a much different conversation that's being had now versus even, 7-8 years ago.
No doubt about it. Yeah, on that topic of budgets, a lot of the time the board is who's approving the budget, but let's be honest, the board doesn't know half the time what's even being done in the model. They don't even know half the time to press F2 to go into the cell to see the formula. And so you're asking really a group that has a lot of industry knowledge, but not a lot of modeling knowledge to approve the model. And that doesn't necessarily always make sense. And so there probably needs to be a redesign a little bit about how that is done. The best organizations that I've seen do it actually sit down in the model and walk them through the calculations. Because a board member, of course, can understand multiplication between two different items, sort of a driver build. Price times quantity is going to give you revenue. You do that across enough service lines, that's going to sum up to everything. People understand that, but a lot of the time they're not seeing that. A lot of the time what they're seeing is just, here was last year's number, and then here it is 3% greater. And they're being asked to approve that. And this is why when people look back and track their forecast, they're nowhere near accurate. I had this one customer that I built a model for. They were a distressed customer, and we were focused on building a cash flow model for them. They had just brought in a new CFO that was apparently going to revolutionize the whole process. And we sat down for 2 weeks and built a really good model. We were both really happy with it. And then a week later, he asked me, hey, we need to change the whole model. I said, oh, it's just assumptions? And no, we need to change the whole thing. And basically the number that he said that we needed to reach for revenue was increased by 70%. And I had no idea where this is coming from. Of course, it was a board push to have this. They were never going to hit those numbers, and they knew it. But that's the numbers they needed to present the board in order to get approval, in order to get their loans from the syndicated organization of banks. And so this piece of the board driving so much of it, what that always needs to happen is, of course, get decentralized and pushed down to the teams that are really in charge of it. If the FP&A can say, I can really stand by this, then you've got a serious model here. This is something I genuinely believe. And then, of course, like you're saying, have your high cases, have your low cases. The best way I've seen it done is, this is what we enter the world of hypothetical modeling now. There's a difference between versions and then scenarios. Versions would be like saving down your Excel workbook. You have a Jan version, Feb, March, April, so on and so forth. But within those Excel workbooks, you have your scenarios. I might have a high case, a base case, a low case. So what that allows me to do then is deal with 36, let's say, layers with which I can compare the model. I can compare my April revenue low forecast to my August revenue high forecast and see how did I do in comparison to those. And that's maybe where your data team can get involved. But this layering and this sort of opportunity, that's a lot to explain to a board and expect them to grasp in a couple of meetings. So that there needs to be a sort of a more involved approach either from the board or more trust given to the FP&A team to say, okay, this is the budget you guys go and achieve.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to achievability too. It's not just a matter of, you could put a number that'll say anything. I could say, hey, look, I'm gonna make $1 billion next year. That's great. I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I presented it to someone. But if it's not achievable, then it's meaningless over there. And if a company's going and strategically making decisions based on, this is where we're going to be now. Oh, well, we'll be at $1 billion in revenue, sure. So we can invest $900 million into operations to improve. And then it turns out that you don't have the $900 million to invest because you didn't make the $1 billion. Then that sets you up for a larger failure there. And it's not just about, hey, look, we presented it, we got the number approved. It's what's the likelihood, of which I think is where you're going with like the scenarios, versioning and everything like that of, being able to look at, well, A, what's the likelihood that we're going to hit these numbers? And B, as we go and forecast in the future, we now have access to the different assumptions and drivers that we used in our past models. How do we evaluate, which ones were better for us, in the past? Maybe we should look at, some of those methods as, driving some of our future numbers that we have to come up with.
No doubt about it. And a lot of the times you'll see that where different members of the FP&A team have a different approach on how they think is best to forecast their company's revenue. And revenue is really the key piece, which is why I always harp on it. If you do revenue right, the knock-on effect for everything else will more or less fall in place. Of course, you can still get it wrong, but revenue is the key piece, of course. And so what I always encourage teams to do is do both, right? If you have two team members really committed to their approach when it comes to revenue forecasting, make both, see which one's more accurate. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe one of them is severely more accurate. Maybe they're both off. You don't know unless you try. And if this is your whole job as an FP&A department, and all the tools, whether it's something as flexible as Excel or something as inflexible as Anaplan, right? You can do that. And if you're willing to put in the effort, you'll be able to not only make the revenue forecast, but then evaluate it against the actuals and see, with my BVA, which one was more accurate here. Now you have an answer. If that's your sole purpose as an FP&A team, then might as well put in the work to get there. And one thing I'm constantly seeing is FP&A teams for these startups are shrinking to just the CFO. So the CFO has to manage all of this most of the time in Excel, which is why the need for systems and this FP&A tool launch over the last 10 years that we've seen has exploded, because they can't do everything themselves. And what they're hoping to do is have a tool that's less expensive than an FTE, like an FP&A analyst, but does the job of an FP&A analyst at least half, so they can relinquish their work but still have enough money in the budget.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a great point because, the space has evolved, quite a bit where, like I always felt like when I just met financial analysts in general and they're, going and doing things in Excel and they're using all the hotkeys and shortcuts and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is all above my ability to comprehend over here. And then I go and I see the modelers that, you take that and multiply it by like 5,000 or whatever, and the speed at which they could, crank through all these models. And, it just shows that like, you have to have a diverse team, in the FP&A function. It used to be that you had a couple of people that looked at, they compared the ERP data, what came out, what was spent. Let me go and look at the receipt for this versus what we have in the system. And like, that was like the extent of their job. And now it's more heavy on, analysis, having those, more technical skills, having, modelers out there that you're not just going and coming up with numbers and, pulling them out of thin air and saying, hey, look, here's what your revenue is going to be next year, but something that's traceable and, explainable to somebody out there. It's more important than ever to have, a diverse skill set in the team to be able to handle, all these different aspects of FP&A.
No, you're totally right. I couldn't agree more. And what I'm seeing now more than ever is this. Traditionally, I've seen people cling to Excel, right? They've said Excel's the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets a model except through this tool. And I totally have. I've been kind of a part of that crowd for a long time. Now, obviously, I've left that Excel world, and I'm with DriveTrain, which is creating an FP&A platform that's aimed at obviously relinquishing Excel. Like anything in today's day and age, everything will export to Excel. It has to be the base. Excel's not going anywhere anytime soon. But what these tools are aiming to solve the problem of is this. Excel is the most flexible thing out there. You can do anything. But something like index match doesn't really make sense anymore. There should be a better way to arrive at a tabular answer when I need to find this on the x-axis and this on the y-axis to arrive at something. And there's better ways to do that. So taking the most flexible parts of Excel, but automating the things that we hate, bringing in actuals, creating reports. These things can be really difficult to stand up in Excel. They can be easy and take a lot of time, or they can be simple and take no time. What if we could have a bit of both, where it was simple and detailed and gets you answers quickly? So that's what's happening now with this push of tools. And you probably know this, but specifically in the FP&A space, there's been three generations of tools that we've gone through, like the traditional old school. You got the first gens, and you got the Anaplans and the Hyperions, and all these sorts of things. And now the market's sort of siphoning from the 128 or so that we had a couple of years ago, and it's shrinking and shrinking. And really, there's two categories now of tools. You have these BI first tools and these modeling first tools. The BI first tools usually have this approach of, I want to give quick value. And so you're going to stand up your model, integrate with QuickBooks and NetSuite or whatever, and everything is going to show up. The problem I see with those is that normally they tell you how to model. You can't really make something quickly unless you already decide for the customer how they're going to have it done. The BI tools do the opposite, where it is a heavier lift, but you actually get to model as detailed as you were expecting in Excel. And so every customer, every FP&A team has to decide what makes sense for them. If you're small enough where these simple ones, the BI first tools make sense, and you can just kind of generically say, these are my metrics, this is what I care about, and if you guys say that's the right way, I believe you, then great. But normally what I'm seeing is people want driver-based forecasting. They want to get really detailed with things. They want departments to be able to come into their tool, make the changes that they need to make, have it be super simple, and then all roll up to that final budget, all with the scenarios in there, all with the versions in there, and everything in between, right? So the space has evolved quite interestingly as time gone by. The money has not ceased from the VCs and all of these venture firms into the FP&A space, because everyone's seeing that there's no public FP&A software out there. There's nothing that's IPO'd, right? Even Anaplan, which is probably the biggest historical and is used by a lot of the bigger companies, they've never even had a profitable year. And so it's interesting to see how this space has evolved. But the next 10 years is going to be very telling, because that 126 original FP&A tools I was talking about is going to siphon down to, in my estimate, probably 5 to 7, which will be very interesting to see.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. And, I love having your insights on here. And, this is, why we started the show. We wanted to, make sure that we had, a diverse group of people from different aspects of, FP&A, and finance in general to, share these ideas. So, just highly recommend anyone tuning in, make sure you, comment on the episode, subscribe to our channel. So that we can have, more great conversations like we're having, right here now. I think that, it's very interesting what you talk about, because, the majority of my business is implementing, first generation or two, tools. I do a lot of Oracle, implementations, and, everyone says, hey, look, spreadsheets are evil. You got to get out of the spreadsheet world because it's so bad. And there are all these, issues with it. Right. And, obviously there are limitations. Anyone that saved a file, this is the final version, and then someone updates it. This is final 1, final 2, final, all that kind of stuff. You run into those, everybody's hit those version control issues, that you don't, hit as much in the centralized tools. But then it comes to the point of, people want to move fast, be able to make modifications, and, you go and in a Oracle or an Anaplan tool or something, you want to go and totally change the fundamental metrics of how your model works. Well, good luck. It's going to be a project in and of itself just to go and change things, right? Oracle, big concept of dimensionality, of how you're slicing your data, and you say, all right, we want a new dimension this year. Good luck, because it's going to take you 6 months to add one more, dimension to your application. And so there's that aspect of, well, with Excel, you want to go and change something. Well, you could probably tell better than anybody else that, it's between seconds, minutes, a couple hours, you could have something fully done, tested, deployed, all that kind of stuff, versus, some of these tools. So, I guess, how do you strike that balance between, getting something that you have that speed to implementation there, versus, something that, maybe takes a little bit more time. Maybe it is a little more robust and gives you some capabilities that the other method doesn't have. How do you balance when to be spreadsheet heavy versus, use a system?
Great question. And you're touching on the three generations again, specifically in the FP&A space, because that first gen was, can we model it all? The second gen was, can we make modifications to the models? And now the third gen is, can we do it ourselves? Because as you know, right, this is part of your gig, everything in those first and second generation tools has to be outsourced to a consultant in order to implement. The FP&A team can't go in there and add a layer of dimensionality themselves. It's not going to happen. So now not only are you buying the tool, you're buying the consultants to service the tool. The costs really compound. And if you're any sort of cost conscious team, you don't want to be, just throwing money out the door every time you want to change to your model. I want to be able to model as flexible as I can and as flexible as I want without having to, spend an arm and a leg on a consultant every time. That's what the third generation tool is trying to solve for. Can the user do it themselves? And this is part of the challenge, right? Because you're talking about really complex stuff that might be doable in Excel because everybody knows how to use it, but doing it on the back end, that's really difficult. So my rule of thumb is this: if you're dealing with the transaction, we're talking IPOs, M&A, these sorts of things, Excel is 99.9% of the time going to be what you're going to model in. Not only from an industry perspective, because bankers are using that and it's easy to float around, but also because you can make changes quickly. You're likely not going to make a DCF in Anaplan or DriveTrain or something like that. You could if you wanted to, just to know the value of your company, but it's unnecessary unless the transaction comes. And when it does come, you're going to go to Excel anyway. When you have a consistent model that's not going to change all too much, that's when you jump to a system. I have 10 million lines of transactions coming in every single month. Excel only holds 1,064,000, right? I'm not going to be able to put those unless I have 10 files. This is too cumbersome for me to hold. All right, let's put it on the cloud. Let's move to a cloud-based system. Let's find one that I can do mostly myself. It's just like Excel, meaning, I still use DAX expressions, which you'd find maybe in SQL. All your if statements, and, ors, min, max, end of month, beginning of month, date, diff, all of those are still intact, but I can handle everything that I need to handle from a transactional perspective, but flexible enough that I can create what's in my mind. And so that's my general rule of thumb. Transactions in Excel, longer term modeling, you need to jump over to a tool.
Yeah, no, that's great input. I always look for it's funny because being on the consulting side, there's always the hey, sure, I wish you have to call a consultant for this or that because it means more business for me, I guess, right? But I also build build my own technology and stuff too, and I always look for what are ways I can take myself out of the equation and make it so that an everyday person can go and just do it themselves, get the information themselves. And I don't know if you've been like exploring AI at all or anything in the function, but I've been doing a lot of work with I'm coming out with a software product that is AI against your data, that you can ask a question in human language of what were my sales last year, right? And it can go and write the SQL for you, or connect to the multi-dimensional database, or generate it in a PowerPoint slide for you, or generate dashboards, things like that. Just from that, because to your point, it is more important to have these teams be able to do self-service versus even just the moving to the cloud, right? We used to see people buy an on-prem product and, they have to call IT. IT says we got to stand up a server, and that's going to take time. Then we got to install the software on the server. Then, we have something bare bones that might be ready for you, might not be. Let's, fumble around with it versus, now it's just like enter your credit card in and, wait for the loading bar to go 30 seconds. And now you have a fully provisioned environment that's ready for you to, model away. Right. And there's not a whole lot of value to that if you still have to then call somebody and wait 3 weeks for them to, go and make the, hey, there's a typo in my account description. Can you go change it? Sure. Give me 2 weeks and I'll come back and do it. Right. Versus being able to just go in and, edit it yourself and, push that through, in there. So, it's, to your point on the, the third gen models is, it's not about, like just get a good tool. It's about get a good tool. You can go do yourself. You have that speed of being able to iterate and change what you need to change. And you get the output that you're looking for without having to, wait for another group to come in or spend a ton of money. I mean, some of these things, cloud products, it's $30,000-$40,000 a year subscription, and then the consulting company that's implementing it hits you with a $500,000 bill to go and do it, and it's all right. I got to spend $500,000 to buy something that's 30K.
No doubt about it. I mean, this is what I call the triangle of death, right? Where you have a tool that's being implemented, you have the implementer, which is usually some third-party company, and then you have the customer itself. When something goes wrong, who's at fault? And for me, that piece is easily avoidable if the company decides to do the implementation themselves. That's what we do at DriveTrain. We're small enough where that makes sense, right? We can actually do that with high quality, and we take that onus on ourselves to build that. But with something like Workday, Anaplan, these guys aren't doing that anymore because they can't. It's not even worth it for them on the revenue line. So now, if you want to implement it, you're accepting that risk, whether you're the customer or the implementer, that I'm going to get yelled at because something's not going to go right. And there's going to be some Spider-Man finger pointing there, like who's who, right?
Right. Because the implementer says, "Oh, this is a defect in the product." The company says, "No, the consulting company didn't implement it right." And you, as a customer, I just want this thing to work. Can somebody just
Yeah.
fix this for me?
And classically, the implementer says, well, you don't know how to use the tool properly yet if you're the customer, right? So there's finger pointing going in every direction. Can be avoided, but it's difficult to do when you are when you are not the implementer of your own product, right? And so yeah, that is quite interesting stuff. Nevertheless,
Yeah, no, definitely. I've learned a long time ago, never blame the customer for anything. So I never have the triangle of finger pointing. It's always defect in product or problem with the implementer. But
sure.
it's it's but it just goes to show you that the more hands you have in the process, the more people that are involved. There's not only just the time value of it, there's the disconnect in, the guy that's just charging you by the hour just wants to, rack up hours to go and implement, like, they implement the product and then are gone. And, where's the incentive to do something that's, easy to maintain going forward? I see a lot of, or I've seen a lot of implementations where, team goes in and they implement the product, and it's okay. Well, here's your 100-page document on how to, flip the year from this year to next year. And it becomes so complicated that, it ends up not getting adopted just because, the customer can't handle the load of maintenance that's on there. And you look at, well, hey, how come you gave me something that's hard to maintain? Well, it works, and you signed off that the calculation was correct over here when we did our testing, but it's something that can't be maintained, and everyone's kind of unhappy with the process versus you start to take some of that on yourself. Now you guys are invested in not just the getting it to work, but getting it to a spot where next year you have to change anything, you're not jumping through hoops, trying to push a small enhancement in.
Sure. No, there's no doubt about it. And on that calculation side as well, what I've seen, especially in the SaaS industry, because SaaS isn't regulated by GAAP, right? There's no accounting rules for SaaS. These are just metrics that people in the SaaS world like to report on. It adds some sort of uniformity and comparison base. But things like, let's say, cost to acquire a customer, traditionally that has been sales and marketing expense over some time period, divided by the number of new customers in that same time period. And people go, hey, look, there's your cost to acquire customers. You spent this is the customers that came in. There you go. We've had several customers come to us and say, yeah, that's what I've traditionally done with this old tool. But I can't do what I really want to do anymore. And so that's why I'm coming to you guys. And so we'll say, what is it that you wanted to do? They say, well, it's not my sales and marketing for my current month. That's feeding my new customers for my current month. I spent that sales and marketing 9 months ago. My pipeline's 9 months long. So it's really 9 months ago's worth of sales and marketing over new customers this month. People need a tool that's flexible enough to be able to do that. And this is where we're before talking about striking the balance between flexibility and automation. Sure, quick time to value if you just decide that's how you calculate CAC. But like we said, there's no GAAP definition of CAC. So why would you define it that way, or at least fix people into defining it that way? Other ways of doing it are like, I've heard of, you probably heard of the magic number or the rule of 40. I've heard customers that want to use the rule of 50 instead. Sometimes people want to use kind of ARR per FTE. Other times they want to use the ROSE formula, which either excludes or includes consultants, right? Which may or may not be FTEs, depending on how you define it. That level of flexibility, especially in the SaaS world, which is becoming a higher and higher proportion of the world's economy every single year, is so, so important. And one thing that a couple of our friends, Ray from Benchmarket and Maxio, that team, as well as the SaaS CFO, Ben Murray, they're linking up to try and create a standardization for SaaS metrics. And they've made a noble effort, no doubt, because no one else has done it yet. But I can imagine that those difficulties in something like CAC are always going to be there. What are we going to do? Mandate that somebody defines their pipeline time? Pipeline times can change. Sometimes you sell a product in 2 days. Sometimes it takes you 10 months to win over that customers. How are you going to do that? And therefore, how are you going to define CAC? It's not going to happen. And so I'm interested to see what comes out of it. We work a lot with them. The SaaS CFO, Ben Murray, Ray at Benchmarket, they are solid guys in the SaaS industry, and they really know their stuff. And so these sort of thought experiments that are coming out of the SaaS world, led by these kind of SaaS gurus, SaaS leaders, are really interesting to follow.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great, because to your point of, not having standardized metrics for things, well, you can report it whatever you want. And, if I'm just going and I'm selling a book, there's obviously a different time to, getting someone to click, I'm buying a $10 product, over here versus, I'm selling a $100,000 software solution that's got to go through 50 layers of approvals and, and all that, you're looking at, hey, my marketing costs over 2 months, but, it takes 2 years to go and get on the approved vendor list of these companies. And, and so, it's not a good metric to go by. And, a lot of companies are trying, especially like what I'm seeing in the reporting space, is they try to get faster time to value by saying, hey, buy my standardized model that goes and, calculates this. So, big ones that I see are, workforce planning, project financials, things like that. And go, okay, go buy my pre-built model. And then you go to try to put it in front of a customer and they're like, well, I like it, but I want to tweak this or that. And it's just, no. You have to do it this way. Otherwise you can't use it. And the whole thing falls apart. And, they end up having to go through these, 6-month, 8-month, 10-month implementations just because, it's not flexible enough to, to meet the changes that, different companies may want.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Standardized models are incredible for when you don't know what you're doing. It gives you sort of a rubric and a starting point, which is awesome because there's a lot of the times with these standardized models, there's formula already intact. You can kind of have your inputs and see how it's flowing through the model. What's my impact from the assumption all the way down to cash and everything in between. But the problem is the moment you know what you're doing, you need to make modifications, and that takes time. Here's one example. I had this one customer, they were in the SaaS space. And for those that don't know, the way you typically do what's called the SaaS corkscrew or the SaaS waterfall is it goes beginning ARR or MRR, and then new, expansion, churn, contraction, ending. And so now within a given month, I can see what's my new ARR, who's my current customers that expanded, and then what are the two opposites, who left and then who just contracted. That gives me my full array of change. The problem was what this customer was doing is they were incentivized by their board to look at customer count. So in this case, they were looking at number of customers through that same new expansion piece. And what they were doing was any customer that joined within the first 3 months, they would count as a new customer. But if they left within the first 3 months, they wouldn't count them as a churn customer because they had a 3-month free trial. And so their thinking was they didn't really churn because they never really paid. So they were taking the best of the upside, but none of the downside of actually losing them. And this kind of goes back to the late Charlie Munger quote, right? If you show me the incentive behind a metric, I can already tell you the output. So of course, their customer numbers were massively overinflated. And when the board even took a simple look at cash relative to a number of customers, they were very, very confused and they had to change their reporting. This is the thing with the SaaS space, though. There are not defined metrics. And so they can decide to do it however they like. Each company has to decide what makes most sense for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It reminds me of, one of the projects that I had. We had to assess $180 million technology transformation. And the board wasn't quite convinced that they were on budget. They were being told that they were on budget. All the financials that were given to them were being told that they were on budget, right? And and it turned out that they went and they said, all right, we're gonna go and they wanted to calculate their value at risk every 15 minutes for every asset on the U.S. stock exchange, right? At 15-minute intervals. They're growing their database by terabytes a month, in terms of storing all the pricing data, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, we're just going to turn off the old systems, and that's we're going to be at a cost neutral status because we're turning off the old systems, and that's going to offset the cost of the new systems. Point being that, when you just show, you can selectively show whatever metrics you want. To your point on, new customers is just the people in the trial, but I'm going to just define away what, my churn is over there so that I look good to whoever I'm presenting this to. In their case, they weren't reporting to the board the technology run costs. And so everything from a development standpoint was on track and they were on budget for everything. And then when you look at that, it's costing them $15 million a year to run these new systems on top of what they were spending on the old ones. It turned out that, they weren't on budget. They were actually going to be $100 million over budget, over the next 5 or 6 years. So it just goes to show you that, it's not just important to have some kind of model out there that works. It's got to be explainable. You've got to, make sure that you have that governance around it where, people that are just being incentivized to go and, show that, hey, our project is on time, on budget. Okay, that's great. But, when I'm looking at the 400 things that are being de-scoped every single month in order to keep you on time, on budget, you're not actually getting in the end what it is that, you set out to do either. So you're making sure you have, kind of all that working, in unison over there.
I mean, that is just such a classic example for why financial modeling is so important. On the revenue side, if you're off, of course, people want to know why you're off, but they give you some leeway because you're not in control of your revenue. If you were, then everybody would be selling billions of dollars per second, right? But what you are very much in control of is your expenditures. You don't have to pay anybody unless you choose to pay somebody. So when they're off by that much on their run costs in this case, this is why financial modeling is so important, because if I know that my cash balance is going to be this in 7 months because of this expenditures, and if I deviate in any way, I'm at risk of having, going below debt covenants or having negative cash balance, whatever the case may be, missing payroll, then I'm in serious trouble. That doesn't happen when you have a financial model, because if you're doing a version every single month and you're updating your forecast because I added this vendor, I removed that vendor, I upgraded this vendor, so I'm paying more for them, I've added people, and in this particular case, this vendor is, number of people multiplied by users or whatever the case, then you don't miss these things. At least you're reviewing it. So that's it. Yeah, that's very interesting, and also interesting that they chose not to show that to the board.
Oh yeah, no, they told them, we're not over budget. We're just asking for future spend earlier, and and it just goes to show you that it's having the knowledge and basic understanding. In that case, my role was just looking at the technology of, is this going to do what they set out to do? There was another part of the team that was looking at financials. I finished my part early, so I said, let me jump on the financials. But, I have a finance, and IT background. So, I know a little bit about, both worlds over there. And just asking the question of like, does this make sense that they are storing the entire stock exchange worth of information at every 15-minute interval, the price of everything at 15-minute intervals, how much their position is on everything that they've never done before, and that they're saying that's not going to cost them anything more to store it? Well, to somebody that doesn't know, how hard drive storage works and what the cost of hard drive storage is, maybe that makes sense. But when you start to say, well, wait a second, this, we're not storing like what I ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, every single day, where, we're storing, so much information in terms of volume. There's no way that it's going to cost you the same thing to run this new system as your, old mainframe that you had that, wasn't calculating anything.
Sure. I mean, cloud storage is one of those things that's only going to decrease in cost. It's not going to increase at all. It'll be kind of like mobile phones, where originally every text cost like $1, and now obviously it's decreased to virtually nothing. You've got the big players like Azure, coming in there, and they charge an arm and a leg, but they're really good. And then you got newer companies like Wasabi who are coming up, and they're not even they're charging 20% of what these guys are. You get to choose. There's this classic saying, you only go to the cloud once. And so when people decide to move to the cloud, they're there for a while. So it really matters where you put your stock. I like what you said there about how they were borrowing. They were borrowing future payment early, right? They were borrowing their future budget early. I was thinking I should do that with my boss and just ask for 30 years worth of salary
Right,
now.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's all fine. I'm sure they'll go for that.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that it's making sure you have the right checks and balances in place, making sure that everything's explainable, that that you have the right information at your disposal there, because nobody could point to the story sounded fishy, but nobody could point to where they were off. And ironically enough, the person running the project won an award for best project management skills and was doing like a keynote speech like that week or something like that. So it was, pretty crazy. But yeah, just without having the right, information governance process, like it's not just about having the model, right? It's about having the governance around it. And, otherwise you're no better off, with the model than without the model if you don't have the right pieces in place.
No doubt about it. And one thing I always encourage people to do, especially early on in their careers, is if you want to gain legitimacy within your leadership, learn Excel really damn well. One, if you know it well, you already gain legitimacy. When people see you doing hotkeys, you have this sort of pseudo uh, reputation as the Excel guy, and people want to use that because let me put this in perspective. I once had a boss that sent me a hard-coded file where, the bottom should have summed and the right side should have summed. It was as simple as that, and he asked me to go put in the formulas for him. Sometimes leadership doesn't know Excel that well, where you can kind of use that to your advantage by knowing Excel. But the other piece of this is simply, if you are the guy or the girl working in Excel and you know how to work it, you're going to be given the responsibilities of big tasks. And if you're in the know with the numbers, then you're in the know with the company, right? Everything eventually will come back to the numbers. Everything comes back to the bottom line at some point. And if it's not the bottom line, it's the top line. Either way, that's coded in Excel, and that's exactly where you're gonna be able to make your impact. So to the young listeners, go out there and learn Excel. There's great tools out there. The FMVA is a classic one for financial modeling, but even on YouTube today, you can go on there for free and get whatever you like. The tangible skills of modeling, they're not going away fast. Excel's going to here now. It's going to be there when we die. And so it's not time wasted to invest in learning it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And what you said there about executives not necessarily having the Excel skills. I worked with a client that they were like, "Hey, I want you to update my Excel model. We're doing all our project forecasting, in Excel. And it takes me, 4 days to go and add a new project over here because I have to manually change all these formulas." And I'm like, well, you can do things a little bit more generically and dynamically. So I went in, I modified the formulas and all that, and I said, I good news is I fixed, I fixed all the formulas. The bad news is I'm trying to test, and I'm trying to tie to the numbers that you have as my test, so that I know that if I come up with the same thing you're coming up with, then we're good. He's like, oh yeah, you're not gonna hit my numbers. My numbers are all wrong. I'm like, but you're presenting this to the board. He's like, yeah, I tell them my numbers are wrong. Nobody cares. And it's like, all right, well, I don't know, how we can do real testing criteria here because there's nothing to tie to over here. But, it's just goes to show that, it's even, the things that are seen as more like basic, like, we can do, modeling in Excel is, there is a skill to it. So, I echo your point there about, going out, learning. There free videos. You don't even have to spend a dime to learn this stuff that, the information's just, all out there.
Totally. And what you're talking about there in that particular instance where the board just clearly didn't take the financial model serious or the budget or anything. Financial modeling for me is like that C.S. Lewis quote. He goes, if God exists, he's of infinite importance. If he doesn't exist, he's of no importance. Financial modeling is the same. If you put effort into it, you can get incredible insights. You will make your company better by simply just understanding the dynamics of your business in an Excel format. But if you don't take it seriously, then of course you're going to have absolutely no value from it whatsoever. And so it sounds like in this case, they were just going through the motions of putting something together because you got to do it for the board so the board can feel like we approved a budget.
Right. Exactly. That's what it comes down to, and it's tough sometimes because it's like we want to all be involved in helping strategically shape companies and this and that, and sometimes it's like you can't help everybody that especially the ones that don't want to be helped, I guess. But I know we're coming up on the end of the show here. I really appreciate you coming on here, sharing all the information that you did. I guess before we wrap up, any other tips, tricks, nuggets of wisdom that you want to share with the audience?
Probably infinite, and an hour wouldn't do it justice, but I would say this: if anybody wants to reach out to me, definitely do so. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just Kirk Kappelhoff. Kirk at DriveTrain.ai as well is my email there. Feel free to add me if you have any modeling questions. Even if you just want to take a look at the DriveTrain platform, what's going on there. Always happy to talk through some finance with some eager learners.
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll put the link to your profile there in the description. That way, they can just click it instead of having to remember all the letters and stuff to type out there. So, again, appreciate you being on the show. We're happy to have you on again in the future to see what other great things you're up to.
Beautiful. Thanks, Daniel. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.